case you haven't met her before, which I highly suspect you have, Kimberly Byrum, who oversees our multifamily practice and who I've worked with almost for a decade. And Kimberly,
More than a decade. It's like 13 or 14 years now.
oh my God, it's gone so fast. And
Yes.
isn't time blowing by like that?
Yes. Yes.
And we're inviting you in today, Kimberly, because we're doing the inside edge. And the concept here is that my hope is through our conversation, you can share some of the cool things I hear from you about what we and you are learning about the market. And ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about the multifamily market. We'll touch a little bit on the BTR market, but we're going to be talking about how do we navigate through the crazy world that is housing right now. So Kimberly, for benefit of getting a start, tell us kind of how you got here. How did you get into the industry and how did you end up with Zonda?
Well, I graduated from Texas A&M. I'm a proud Aggie in 1991, which is in the middle of a recession. And I was fortunate enough to answer an ad in a newspaper for someone that knew how to use WordPerfect and Lotus 1-2-3. And my resume landed on the desk of the chief administrative officer of JPI, which was a large multifamily builder. They weren't large back then. They were really just based in Dallas. They had 7 properties. And so I joined them, actually took the place of a very well-known developer who had been promoted up into a development associate. And I was one of the only people in the firm with a computer on my desk. I think at the time, voicemail was the biggest, introduction into this space. So they thought I was brilliant because I could do spreadsheets. And at the time, my boss would tape together legal pieces of paper with all the calculations done with his 10C computer, 12C, reverse Polish, and hand it to me and say, "Can you put this on the computer?" And so that was kind of how I got my start, was doing all kinds of, analysis in the spreadsheet world. And from there, I built up. I remember I would survey competitors. We had 5 properties in Las Colinas, which is a large, commercial master plan mixed use community way back in the day. And I would phone call every community myself and get their current, leasing stats, occupancy, et cetera. And I realized that if I made a copy of it on a copy machine, folded it up and mailed it out to everybody that responded, they were much more willing to respond. And so at this time, I started getting phone calls going, "Hey, can I get a copy of your market study?" And so I really kind of, got into the industry and became very good friends over the phone with lots of people in building up a great time series in Las Colinas. And then as we grew, I grew with the company. And one of my favorite stories to tell is I remember the first time that I set rents over $1 a square foot. And I thought I was absolutely going to have a heart attack and die. And it was for one of our properties on Congress in Austin, Texas. And I was just like, no one is ever going to pay this much for rent. I mean, it's just absolutely out of control, this $1 per square foot rent. So I think that's kind of a funny story.
Perspective. What would those rents be now?
Oh my goodness. In that property, I should go check, but I would say probably touching $3 a square foot easily. Yeah. So it's really, and I was just able to learn as I worked at the company. I was able to grow as we grew our platform, and so go into different markets. I always worked with operations, so I have a really strong understanding of operations and what's going on there. And so it really kind of helps me not just be a big book report writer, but also kind of feel the pain.
Well, and one of the things I like to do when I introduce you to a crowd at one of our events is talk about the time frame you were at JPI. I mean, you were there for 20 years.
Almost 20 years. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And you expanded to a national role. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct. And we were actually a joint venture institutional partner with GE Capital at the time. And so that was a great opportunity because I was able to work with the risk managers at GE on a quarterly basis. I would fly with the risk managers across the country. And at that time, they were actually partnering with PPR Research, which I'm not even sure if they're still around, but they would talk about the commercial markets and grade those. And then I would add our expertise on the multifamily multifamily space because GE was paying, half of our service company at that time. So it was their research as well. So I was able to really get in and see how equity looks at deals, looks at markets. And GE really always, there's a lot of alumni out there, by the way. GE always prided themselves on, their black belt, the way that they looked at markets and how, they really underwrote that risk. And so it was a really neat opportunity to kind of learn throughout the country, where the different markets were and, stay on top of that.
So with that nationwide perspective, I mean, you have that with us now. Talk about some of the markets that you're working in and also maybe some nuance because not every market is equal.
No, that's exactly right. And one of the things that I always like to say is, because we worked nationally, I think we really bring a great perspective to our clients because, we may see something in Portland, Oregon that's applicable or an idea that may work in Tampa, so we're really able to bring that expertise globally. We have a great Canadian team. And there are times I have one client that works in both Canada and the United States where we'll get on the phone and talk about what we're seeing in the US and here's how we do it in the US. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of, fertilize different markets with that expertise. The small markets are, sometimes people think, oh, the small markets are so much easier. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just so much harder to get information in a small market or a small market is not as dynamic. If you saw my last webinar, I kind of broke out the southeastern markets into flagship metros, growth metros, and then I have new horizon metros. And those new horizon metros are actually kind of like, behind the pack, and haven't quite, entered that expansion phase again and are jumping to catch up.
Kimberly, give us an example of one of the new horizon markets.
Oh my goodness. Well, right now we're working in some of the coastal northeastern markets. We recently looked at a project in Portsmouth, which is New Hampshire. And we're also working on another project in Manchester by the Sea. And the challenge is, with a lot of these, we just looked at something in Park City, Utah, is that you don't have comps locally. So you really have to, get creative and understand, where the incomes are, what people are willing to pay, and maybe go miles to look for, comparable properties because I would much rather look at a comparable property and see what it's getting for that level of product and adjust it for location. And we did that years ago. Even in Arizona, there was a time when we were picking comps based on who had granite countertops. I mean, we went all over because that was like the latest craze and it really set the project apart from laminate. So, again, Riverside County in California, another great example of you may have to go 17 miles to find, product that is equal to what you're building.
Well, I appreciate what you said about how you came up into the industry and then what you do with us. It's almost like we have national coverage and local experience, and that together gets us to the right answer. And
100%.
one of the things that you do and your team does so well before we jump on to other topics, I love when you do stripped rent analysis. And it's a mathematical way to prove out our rents. Give us the quick take on what that is.
Oh my gosh, me too. I'm actually a dork when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I'm hoping someday AI can help us make this a little more efficient. But the last time that I counted, we adjust for 269 different amenity options, and that's within the unit and on the exterior of the unit. And so we're picture, a very long spreadsheet with every floor plan, and we audit the closets. We look at the ceiling heights. We are getting down to as the four walls basically, and then of course looking at the community amenities as well. On the BTR, by the way, there's a new, we really need to start looking at those fees. We hear from our clients and anecdotally that people shop off rents, and I don't disagree with that. But when you consider all-in rents, sometimes in some of these different little micro markets, you will see a lot of distortion in pricing just based on the technology packages alone. So that's just another area where I'm really pushing my team to make sure that we're getting the best data that we can get.
Well, and for you listeners, I hope you heard that loud and clear because we have a very strong embracing of ROA we're looking at the return on amenities.
Correct.
And what Kimberly just mentioned with pet fees and tech fees and parking fees, the rent is one thing, but you could get another 20, 25% upper with that additional
It's
fee.
got a
So
quarter of rent in most of the BTR in West Valley. Yeah.
right on.
So, and it's important to look at, that positioning, but there's still not a lot of transparency out in the marketplace on fees. It's gotten better, but a lot of those bots, you can actually test those bots and see what they'll tell you about the fees. That's always one of my little hacks. But overall, sometimes you have to go all the way down to almost leasing an apartment to get full transparency on all the fees that are out there. So it would make sense that a prospect that's coming in is only considering rent until they get to that level.
So go back in time, ladies and gentlemen. Think about what Kimberly was talking about, being a Lotus 1, 2, 3 expert. I remember it well. What hasn't changed is Kimberly's still deep in the numbers. But Kimberly, a lot of things have changed. And as you look at the industry and how we're dealing with it, what are some of the changes you've seen over the last 30 plus years?
Fair. Well, each cycle brings a different challenge to the forefront. And as I was mentioning to you, when we started hitting this, this rate increase era, let's just call it July of 2022. Everybody going to mark that on the calendar. I went back into my file because I still have files, sorry, and I pulled out my underwriting challenges from the great financial crisis and is now sitting on my desk. And I look at that and I think about the ways that we need to change. So I'm always outlining what are the challenges that we're facing? What are the questions that equity is asking? Because that's what really drives the way that we're going to research the markets. And so we're deep. Anytime I get on the phone with someone and they're going out to market, I'm always happy to talk with the equity groups. What I'm seeing right now, so kind of getting into right now, what is rent? And what is rent today? And of course, for a developer, they want to underwrite the highest rent that they can for the product that they're building in 2 years or 3 years, because they know that the equity sources are not going to allow them to escalate their rents. And so that's the goal, right? But then you have managers, and a lot of our developers have are fully integrated. They have management companies. Then they want those teams on board early. Well, they're on the ground right now. And they're fighting 8 to 10 weeks free. Some of these markets are, have not absorbed all of their excess supply and are still delivering more, some to the tune of, 25% more units that are still working through the system, plus what's coming. So they are in hand-to-hand combat, in that 8 to sometimes 10 weeks free, but mostly 8. And it does come down as they stabilize. And I've definitely seen that. But when you're trying to get the team on board, that's a challenge because they're in it today. You've got developers trying to think of value creation forward. And so that's when we become really important because we're here to help quantify it all, not just the feeling that you get, but quantifying it all. And that's, I think one of the things that I'm the most proud of with our teams and with our methods is the way that we are able to quantify every aspect of the value that we're trying to create within the community and within the unit.
That's beautifully said. And it connects to the questions we often get asked. And this doesn't matter if we're going to the for sale or the rental side. Supply is such a point of contention. We have too much supply. We're going to never burn through it.
Yes.
All these challenges. Talk to us, though, about supply in general for the multifamily side of the world and some of the things we can expect going forward.
Well, Tim, first thing, I can be a little bit crazy sometimes. And so one of the things that I'm going to say is submarkets are out. I don't want to hear submarket analytics anymore. And I'm really challenging my team on this. And here's why. Look at the West Valley. That's comprised of 2 submarkets, 50,000 units. When I look at my localized competitive market set, it's probably 3,000 units within my market area. I mean, you could be to a 20-minute drive from north to south of that submarket. So when we're looking at supply, I'm really challenging my team to get out of the submarket mindset and really try to build what you think that competitive market area is. And look at the supply in there, understand what's coming, understand where the excess units are. And that's where we want to underwrite to. So when you look at, for instance, I'm looking right now at a project in the West Valley,
West Valley of Phoenix.
Yeah.
West Valley.
Overall, 10,000 units coming still over the next 6 quarters. for this one particular community that we're analyzing, there's like 15 comps. Some of them are gardens, some of them are townhome, and then, quite a bit of cottage. And within that, their competitive set is really bringing on only 929 more. So we have 77 units that we still need to burn through. I mean, 929 is a lot on 3,000 units. It's still about a quarter of the base, but it's a lot different than 10,000 units. And 10,000 units scares people away. So you really have to get local, understand your market. And I'm going to share a secret. What I'm challenging my team with is I'm like, go to Yelp, look up the grocery stores from your side and eyeball their trade areas, because Walmart Supercenter is not going to build another Walmart Supercenter to cannibalize themselves. And so help those boundaries help you draw those competitive market areas.
Kimberly, I love what you just said about submarkets are out. And, let's make it a nuance. We'll rephrase this a little bit, because go back to one of the things you said about early comp analysis. Sometimes you go 17 miles away to find the same comp that had granite countertops. I like what you're talking about, that we need to shape a competitive market area, not around necessarily a circle or a geography, but we've got to look at all the factors like shopping and access and the roads and the schools. So I think that's an important takeaway.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where, what we do, or certainly what I do, where I've always added the most values to my client, is Main and Main. Everyone can pick up a report with someone's opinion on where those 10,000-foot markets are going. But where I find the most value to my client is what's going on at Main and Main. And knowing, that level of detail is what my clients are asking for.
I like that. Another thing that you have brought to our organization and that you're diving into that I appreciate so much is the OpEx analysis. You mentioned it a minute earlier, but let's dive into that, because this micro assessment is so vital, particularly now.
Exactly. Well, it kind of, everything that we do in our business, comes from a problem, right? And so I make this joke, but I'm not really joking when I sometimes say I'm not a market analyst, I'm a market psychiatrist. And certainly when it comes to pipeline, because that can really weigh you down. And in times like this, and this is exactly what was happening during the great financial crisis, developers become asset managers because they're not busy developing. They're watching every lease that's coming in the door or walking out the door. And so, this literally was born out of one of my conversations with the client and their frustration with their operator. And so I said, oh, and of course, the knee-jerk reaction is to hit the red button and fire everybody and start over. And it was like March. And I was like, oh, please, let's not do that right before peak leasing season. Let's see what we can do. And so, I began to work with his team, work with his operations group, and really just kind of, step back, because when you work with operators, you will understand right away, they are gifted at tactics. They are tactical all day long. So a pipe breaks, they fix it. Bad weather, put the signs out. I mean, they are tactical people, list people. They are great at that. But when you're in the weeds, you cannot see the forest for the trees. And so a lot of times bringing back over that tactical person, the strategy and the market and where it is today, you're expecting this person who's very tactical to have that strategic mindset. And some do, but most don't have time. And so that's where we come in. We've done diagnostics where we're like, hey, here's a line in the sand. Here's kind of what we're seeing today. Here's some, real world recommendations. And I can't affect change at a property management company for sure, but I can whisper in the owner's ear and the developer's ear and say, try this, try that, move this ship.
Like
Right. And so it's just, and we've seen this, I coined this phrase, and then I saw it in a couple of different places, but lease up fatigue, where, and we see this in the data where you'll see a project is doing 25 move-ins a month, and this is multi, not BTR, 25 move-ins a month until they hit 50% occupancy. And then after that, it slows down. It slows down for a lot of reasons. You're running out of your best inventory. You got everyone in, the excitement's kind of over. Maybe you've leased all your best units up front. And so you're really trying to move through the end of that inventory. And furthermore, depending on how large your project is, you might be also starting to deal with renewal activity. And so it just really slows the pace, and it really brings the staff down, they're bummed out. And so I see it, and there's so many reasons for it. And so that's why, kind of stepping back and looking at the holistic strategy again, is extremely important. So those are some of the things that we're doing with our clients. And it's, again, I love it because it makes me a better analyst. And I think it really sets us apart from a lot of those big book report writers, and that
I
we
hear
know what
you.
we're talking about. We've been on the ground. We understand.
Kimberly, the lease up fatigue, I certainly have seen on the BTR side. Maybe 150, 150 units is kind of where we get to that place. On the multifamily side, have you seen a unit total that kind of guarantees we'll start to see lease
It's
fatigue?
interesting. I mean, yes, just generally any of them. I mean, anything under 200 units always leases slower as a general rule. I think 300, max 350. But I will say this, Tim, I really do think in this next product that will come out after 2026, 27-ish, will have to be larger because they're going to have to spread construction costs over more units if they can. So that is one of my predictions, is that we'll start to see larger project sizes again. So, we've done lots of work, and I will tell you, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that a 500 unit deal leases slower than a 300 unit deal, or that you should discount those units. We have never seen that in the data, but we watch it and we're looking for it. And anytime we underwrite something that's, 350 plus units, in a sea of maybe 200 unit deals, I mean, we want to be mindful of that, and we want to talk about that because equity may ask about that. So we want to make sure that we've addressed it.
Kimberly, as we get to our wrap up, a couple things that I want to make sure everybody caught from what you were talking about. I love and embrace the same thing, that questions are really what lead us to our answers. We have these questions that come from capital, from our operators. It helps us zero in on the research to answer the questions. Also, when you were talking about submarkets versus a CMA, they're not always the same thing. And I think that's such a fresh way for us to keep thinking about it. And by the way, love the Yelp concept of understand where the shopping is, and there's going to be some kind of overlay. And then ultimately, that OpEx element is so important right now. And I love what you were saying about tactical and strategic, because that's what we're doing, is we're pulling those things together. Now, as we look forward with that supply challenge, you said, 6 to 8 quarters could be interesting. With our rent growth expectations or lack thereof, give us some trends and elements we should think about as we go forward in the multifamily world.
Well, I already mentioned the one. I do think that we will see larger deals coming back around. I am a little worried about value engineering and want to work with teams on, again, you mentioned this already, return on amenities. I've done some interesting analysis on amenity packages. Sometimes an amenity package, you don't get dollar per dollar everything that you're adding, because some of the amenity may mitigate a less desirable location. Versus a great location with a big amenity package, you're going to get dollar per dollar, because you're not having to overcome any challenges there. So, those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. I mean, I will tell you too, Tim, this is a very new, hot off the press observation, certainly on the cottage product. And what I'm seeing there is there's actually now a subsector. So we have core cottage, which is really that first gen, the home. It's exciting. It's still, they all still look pretty similar. Not a lot of product differentiation in the home. But now we're starting to see what I call lifestyle cottage product, and that is with all of the amenities. And I will tell you, I've not seen a lot of pricing differentiation in the two. So that's a challenge. And then tack on those technology fees, and it's really hard to understand where the market pricing sits today. But that's something, I mean, I find now a subsector within cottage is that core and that lifestyle community.
So, for the benefit of our listeners today, this is a conversation Kimberly and I have been having for a couple of weeks now. It's only going to get deeper. And just know that we're here to help in any way, shape, or form. Know that Kimberly and our multifamily team, they're the best in the industry. That's why I invited Kimberly in to talk today. And hopefully you picked up a couple of the nuances of the great work that we do. And most importantly, Kimberly, thank you for sharing. And thank you for continuing leading the charge on our excellent work. We appreciate it. Thank you.